Russian smuggling schemes have received a second wind. They are still trying to transport coal that has fallen under sanctions to Europe, but now they slipped into the trick. Russian ships have begun disabling the automatic identification system, AIS for short, so that no one can track their movements. We have received concrete proof of this. How is this chain of circumvention of sanctions arranged? Why are the banned energy resources still going to Europe? Is it possible to end this already today? I'm Oleksii Matsuka, and we will try to answer these questions right now. For 8 months now there has been a ban on the sale of coal from Russia, but it's still secretly shipped all over the world. Moreover, I don't rule out that in fact this coal in Ukrainian bought cheaply in the mines of temporarily occupied territory Donbass. There are official figures. They say that Moscow has increased sales to Morocco, Egypt and Turkey. But the fact we have received indicate that they continue deliveries to European Union. But now they began to mask their roads. We will see the evidence step by step. Last month we noticed 2 very suspicious ships, the Palau-flagged River Queen and the Kamans-flagged Volzhansky 33, which were transporting coal from Russian ports, entering the raid zone number 451 near the port of Kavkaz. The captains of the ships sent deliberately false information to the AIS system that they were supposedly heading to the Turkish ports of Samsun and Bandırma. And after that, the system was turned off. Let me explain with a simple example. It's like an airliner plane would take off from some airport and then suddenly disappeared from the radar. Where is it? What's wrong with it? Until it appears on the radar again, you won't understand that, but only in aviation this is impossible. This is an emergency situation, and in the maritime business Russia is using this trick with might and main. So it's the ships that I told you about. Do you know where they turned on the AIS system? In a special terminal of the Romanian port of Constanta, which is mainly used for unloading coal. At the time of this broadcast, River Queen is again in Constanta and left Rostov 3 weeks ago, what once again proves that this is one of the ghost ships involved in circumventing sanctions. Motor ships which lit up in Russian ports with a cargo of coal, then allegedly disappeared and then again visible at the finish of the route in Romania, already empty. I began to check who owns this ship, and I found out the ship was recently renamed so that it would not be evident once again. But until last autumn it was called Mechanic Yuzovich and belongs to the commercial fleet of Donbass enterprise registered in occupied Mariupol. It also has an operator, a company that gives orders to the captain where and when to go on a freight, also from Mariupol. The co-founders include a number of businessmen with Kiev and Zhytomyr residence permits. Phones, as one would expect, are switched off. Let's digress briefly to figure it out. is it legal to turn off the AIS system in general? Let's see why this automatic vessel identification system is needed in principle. Initially, it was created for the exchange of data between ships in order to avoid collision. Then it began to be used by ship traffic control services when approaching ports or passing bottlenecks or shipping channels. The data eventually became open. On many sites, it became possible to enter the movement of any ship and track it. As a response to this, a practice appeared when ships engaged in poaching or smuggling began to disappear from the radar.
Government agencies and marine insurance companies rely primarily on AIS as a monitoring tool, but it has its limitations. Vessels engaged in illegal activities may turn off the AIS transponders and disappear from the map. John Serafini, CEO of Hawkeye 360.
Immediately after the start of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, AIS systems were turned off on dozens of yachts of Russian oligarchs that fell under sanctions. But private yachts are one thing, and large merchant ships are quite another. On what grounds can they disappear from the map? Commercial planes have similar data transmission systems, and their transponders are turned off only on special occasions. For example, the plane of Joe Biden, President USA, before his visit to Ukraine through Poland couldn't be traced precisely because the transponder was turned off for security purposes. Understandable, President. But this is an exception. On the water, however, international law does not make concessions even for VIP persons. It requires commercial vessels to always activate the automatic identification system when at sea. There is only one exception.
AIS recognition system should always be enabled unless international agreements or regulations protect navigational information. If the captain feels it is safer to disable the device, he may do so by providing the flag state with the reason. Peter Hinchcliffe, Secretary General of the International Chamber of Shipping.
Did you pay attention to this wording? The reason must always be reported. Such a basis may be, for example, the threat of a pirate attack. But Russian merchant ships themselves act like pirates because they began to turn off the AIS simply in a mess. The first case as if on command, although most likely exactly on command, were Russian oil tankers. But even they disappeared from the radar only for 2-3 hours when oil was poured on board another ship in the open sea from a country that is not under sanctions.
With the transponder turned off, Russian sanctioned oil tankers transship oil and oil products onto non-sanctioned tankers. Parking for about 3 hours of such tankers confirms this assumption, since this is the time that is enough to reload oil at sea. From the material of the publication Windward.
Do you know who Moscow adopted this scheme from? Tehran, the brother in tough sanctions. And the second country that does this is Venezuela. Well, now, as I was able to establish, this Iranian method was also used with coal. It's time to return to the investigation. An analysis of the documents that I managed to obtain shows that a full fleet of host ships is operating within the framework of one smuggling scheme. Here are just a few of them: Angora 2, Grigory Malov, River Grace, Mamad Amin, all of them take on board Russian coal banned for sale in the European Union, disappear by turning off the AIS. And they are found in Romania, a country of the European Union which, according to all the rules, should not buy sanctions products. How Russian businessmen work in Romania, I found out in one of my previous investigations. There is reason to believe that documents are being forget at sea. When in the same Rostov, according to the documents, the cargo is still Russia, and in the port of unloading, Constanta, the same coal but Kazakh or Polish, and customs apparently turns a blind eye to this. Especially now, when it's physically impossible to trace where the goods are delivered from, AIS is turned off. The ship appears on radar, as if from nowhere, no route, no history. The problem is really huge. Just as by unleashing a war against Ukraine, Moscow destroyed international principles that had been developed for decades, so now maritime norms and rules can collapse overnight. After all, if the Kremlin can, why can't others do the same? What is being done? Firstly, in the West, they have even put into development a new system for tracking ships via satellites. When you turn off the AIS, there is still nowhere to hide from satellites. And secondly, there is no need for space technologies when all the black schemes are in full view. They simply, I guess, in the same Romania, and I think other European countries, close eyes over it. I don't think it's free. And coal is just one example. Recently, Bloomberg published sensational information. It has been calculated that Russian purchases of microchips and integrated soccer suits have returned to pre-war levels by 2020. How can this be if Moscow uses missiles to bomb Ukrainian cities, if officials' sales are closed? And the European Union has just approved the 10th package of sanctions. So something is clearly going wrong.
Our sanctions bite hard and contribute to a sustained economic downturn in Russia, but their effectiveness also depends on how well they are followed. Valdis Dombrovskis, Vice President of the European Commission.
And now, this is the key. Not how tough the sanctions are on paper, but how seriously they monitor the implementation, and in this regard, Europe is very far behind the United States.
With a longer history of sanctioning foreign powers, the US has a centralized agency, more efficient procedures for gathering information, as well as stringent legislation, and the tools to enforce the rules at home and abroad. From Bloomberg publication.
So, it turns out that somewhere the observance of the sanctions regime is monitored, and seriously. But somewhere earnings for some people are more important to them than international laws. That's why they look through the fingers, and the US sees it too. Just the other day, the United States Department of Justice decided to urgently expand the Export Control Department to hire new prosecutors whose task is to strengthen control over compliance with sanctions. According to the information that was shared with me in American diplomatic circles, a list of countries will be assigned to each of the members of this team, and they will be instructed to interact with the governments, customs and port authorities of the states, not only by establishing an exchange of information, but also by motivating them to cover up the loopholes that Moscow found in order to circumvent sanctions. With the money from the sale of sanctions resources, Moscow finances the war, purchases the drones from Iran, ammunition from North Korea. Every ton of coal or oil that someone overlooked, missed, received in European Union in a different ship are new victims and destructions here in Kiev and Ukraine. This means that even if a dozen ships from the smuggling fleet that I managed to detect it are no longer allowed into the ports of the European Union, there is already at least a few quiet nights for us, without the air raid and shelling. I'm Oleksii Matsuka. Don't miss new videos. I'm preparing a lot of interesting things for you. Thanks for watching and see you soon.